Hello, my name is Scott Parker, and welcome to episode 4 of the Road to the Empire Strikes Back. Now, when this video is published, it will be 40 years to the day since The Empire Strikes Back premiered back in 1980. That will be May 21st, 1980. And I have been looking at all of the things and events that led up to that momentous event for all of us kids. And today I'm going to focus on comic books. Now, I think most everyone who was alive back in the late in 1977, 78, and 79 and loved Star Wars read the Marvel comic book adaptation. And then, of course, the coolest thing was Star Wars issue number 7, in which it was the first of the new adventures that we did not see in the movie. And it pretty much paved the way. Between the two movies, we'd get a monthly installment of something new with our Star Warriors, as Marvel people like to call them. Now, there's a great website called Mike's Amazing World of Comics. And one of the cool things that it does is that it is a massive database that you can actually search for any comic and you can find out any of, Marvel, DC, Archie, Harvey, all of the comics back in the day. You can search for them and you can find out when they actually showed up on newsstands. I did a little bit of research because I wanted to know what Star Wars comic book, actually showed up in the months of 1980, January, February, March, April, the 4 months leading up to Empire. I wanted to find out what issues they actually had on the newsstands that we could buy. And I found them. They began with issue 34, 35, 36, 37. Those are the 4 issues that immediately preceded the release of the movie. And I still have my comic books. It turns out issue number 34, which is right here, this came out in January of 1980, you needed to go back 3 additional issues to get the full story, because what you have here is this really nice long 7-issue story arc that led up to literally the doorstep of the Empire Strikes Back movie. And I have read this story. I've reread this story. I haven't read it in 40 years, and I wanted to know what it was like to be reading these comic books leading straight into Star Wars. And I gotta say, it's a trip. Now, a few issues before that, this is kind of fun. This would have showed up in 1978, but you get issue number 18. It's The Empire Strikes, which back in 78 or probably late 77, they didn't have an idea of that the title of the next movie would be The Empire Strikes Back. So this actually starts a great storyline that culminates in a thing called the Wheel of Death. This 6-issue arc from issue 19 through whatever 6 is, 23, it's a great story. And so the writers at the time, it was Archie Goodwin. He was the writer and the editor. And the artist was Carmine Infantino. You know who he is now. I know who he is now. At the time, in the late 70s and into 1980, I did not know who Carmine Infantino actually was in terms of comic book history. All I knew was he was the guy who took over the penciling duties for Star Wars. This might be sacrilege to some. I don't know, your mileage may vary. But I didn't always like Carmine's art on Star Wars. I'll show you a few panels from the stories we're talking about, but even this past week in rereading these issues, I'm like, can we have other people do it? I mean, the adaptations was, I think, Al Williamson, or maybe he did the Empire one, I can't remember right now. That art was really good. Carmine's art is just very Carmine. I mean, it's weird, everything's boxy and I didn't really like it. I know it's comic book history sacrilege to say that, but Carmine's art on Star Wars I never dug. He did good on ships. I'll say that. When he draws spaceships, he does a really good job. And that might have been Gene Day. I don't know. But Carmine's name's first. Carmine's name's on the cover. That means pretty much Carmine ran the day, right? So anyway, side note. The comic strip in the newspaper. It's been collected into at least 1 or 2 volumes. This is volume 1. But I don't know about y'all, but my newspaper here in Houston actually ran the Star Wars daily comic. And I believe it began in '78. You would get a little 2 or 3 panel part of a larger Star Wars story each and every day to go along with the monthly issues of the comic book. So in case you don't remember what it was like or weren't alive back in between the 2 movies, when you didn't have VHS, when you didn't have a DVD, when you didn't have a Star Wars playing on network television, because I didn't have cable, you had the comic books, you had the comic strips, and that was it. You had the Star Wars figures, of course. But so any piece of Star Wars that you could get, especially on a daily basis, was just fantastic. And I'm not sure, I can't remember if I was reading the paper at that point. I would have been, 8, 9, and 10 years old, going into 11 years old back in these years. But I know I read the funny pages, and I read Star Wars because I read Star Wars. But anyway, so January of 1980, you get into issue number 34, which, like I say, it actually begins 3 issues back with a return to Tatooine. This is actually a really good story. Archie Goodwin, again, is a good writer. And he goes back, and you actually get, if you can see what I'm talking about, you actually get content that goes back to the sketches, the early stuff that was actually cut out of the movie. One of my favorite scenes, which is the big scene from the movie that was cut out, and the whole scene where Luke goes to see Cammy and Fixer and his friends and talks about the space battle. That whole scene that was cut out of the movie but was actually in the radio play. You get images like that in this issue. And of course, the coolest thing you get, well, there's 2 cool things on this thing. One, Luke goes back to his home, which has been burned out, and he meets up with Fixer again. And Fixer and Cammy have made their life. Biggs is gone. Who don't even know whether or not they know if he's dead or not. And of course, Luke's gone off world, and he's presumed dead. Now, later in the issue, Fixer actually sells him out, which is, maybe that's the end of Fixer's story. I didn't read any farther on the Marvel stuff, but it's just neat to have Archie go back to something that George originally wrote that was never touched on in the movie. And of course, what's really cool for the kid in me, that was 1979, is you get in the issue the Imperial troop carrier. Yes, I had the toy. Yes, the toy was cool. And when you see the toy actually in the book, it is fantastic. I have to say, it was a trip to reread these stories, these 6 issues and 12 issues before that, and just see the ads, and it was wonderful. But if you remember the character name Tagge, Tagge, he was in the movie, he was in the Death Star, and he was at the scene in which one of them gets choked. I can't remember for which one is which. I mean, there goes my Star Wars cred, but hey. So there's a whole concept in the comic books about the House of Tagge, Tagge, House of Tagge, and how they were trying to curry favor with the Emperor, and not and to circumvent and undermine Darth Vader. It's a great side story to this whole Star Wars mythos. That was one of the best things about the time, again, between the 2 movies, was that everything was wide open. I know Archie probably had some guidance from Lucasfilm or Lucas himself, but I honestly think that Archie was just free to make up stuff as he went along, and he probably passed it by George to see yes or no. But just having Archie Goodwin's imagination run wild in the Star Wars universe, it may have been one of the only times we've ever had that chance to have that happen. But anyway, the Taggy brothers, there's two of them. There's a Baron Taggy and there's a Scientist Taggy. They are trying to develop a new freeze weapon. And what it does is, if you have two towers, and between the two towers, if they turn on the machines, it freezes everything instantly. And they test drive it in Tatooine. And that's where Luke's there. Luke's there is trying to get some blockade runners to help for the rebel cause. And he stumbles into this story. And of course he has to elude some Imperial guys on the dewbacks. And Han's there, of course, because, they go to Mos Eisley and Han Solo are naturally there. So they get themselves wrapped up, and at the end of issue 31, they escape to the desert, and they run into some Jawas. So that will be the next issue. And so you end up having the freeze machine freezing portions of the desert. And the Taggy brothers realize that, hey, now that it works on a desert planet, it's certainly going to be able to work in space. Because their big plan, that there's a planet, I forgot the planet's name, but there's an asteroid field. And they have made it so that the rebels are going to try to go through the asteroid field to get to the planet for supplies. And the bad guys have installed two giant towers in this asteroid field, and with the goal to get the ships inside in the middle of everything. They're going to turn the freezing towers on. All the rebel ships will be frozen, dismantled. Everyone will be killed, and the House of Taggy will then have its moment to shine with the Emperor and against Lord Darth Vader. There's your big overarching plan. And it is just a blast to see some of this stuff, because it's Luke, Han, and Chewie, and they don't team up with Jawas, but they end up getting captured by Jawas, and they use the Sandcrawler as an offensive weapon. Now we've seen a little piece of that in The Mandalorian. I forgot what episode, so don't hold it against me. But again, just having Luke and Han and Chewie on their own, the droids are there too. Having an adventures leading up to it, which leads up to, which nice, right before, this would be December of 1979, where you actually have Baron Taggy. He has trained himself to use a lightsaber, and he wants to actually fight Vader with the lightsaber, but he needs to practice. And he decides to practice with Luke, and so he jury rigs this entire plot just to get Luke alone so he can fight Luke and basically, bone up on his lightsaber skills before he actually faces off Darth Vader. Here, let me show you a little bit of Infantino's ship artwork. See right there? I mean, it's definitely a little bit of flat, not elongated, but it's so detailed. And so ship work is really good. And of course, lest you forget what month we're in, Star Wars issue number 33 actually has the ad for Star Trek the Motion Picture, which came out in December 1979. I'll tell you what's a trip with these comic books, reading them with the ads, is you actually get to see some of the ads for the Star Wars stuff. I forgot what issue it was. I'll find it. But anyway, so Baron has his saber clash, which is where we lead in January of 1980. And Luke finds himself stranded on one of the asteroids as Han and the Rebel fleet go into the asteroid field to try to, get the supplies that they need. And of course, Luke is stranded on an asteroid. He's got his lightsaber with him, and he's got a jetpack, which is just like, so science fiction-y. You just got to love it. And the Scientist Taggy and the Baron Taggy, they have they execute the test to make sure that the snow and the freezing works. Take a look at the splash panel. I mean, that's a pretty impressive splash panel for a standardized comic book. Can you even imagine this in the treasury size? Well, as you can imagine, Luke saves the day, and the Scientist is humiliated, and the ship that they're on gets blown up, and you think they're all dead, which leads you to the next issue, which is episode number 35. And for the first time in, I can't remember how many issues, Vader shows up. And with this is one of the coolest issues in this entire run, especially in the time between the movies, because he has a singular goal, which is to find out the name of the pilot who blew up the Death Star. Now, we learn that in Empire, and of course in the special edition there's more words, which talks about the son of Skywalker. But back then, Vader's not his dad, which makes it a lot more fun. And in almost every panel, Vader has the red eyes that you see in Star Wars the movie. This issue in particular, I don't know what I did with it, but it has water stains. You may not be able to see it, but it got wet somewhere, and I don't know how it got wet. And I'm not quite sure what my younger self was thinking, but every now and then we'll just draw blank teeth on Luke Skywalker's face because I'm 11 and 10 or whatever. I don't know. Did you do that? And of course nowadays you'd be like, it's defacing a comic. But as I'm saying, I read these things. I took them and I didn't have them bagged and boxed. I had them in boxes because I just read them over and over again. And what's interesting, what's really good about these next 3 issues is that Luke and Vader literally are in the same space at the same time, talking to each other. And it is a great thing because what's interesting here is that the Taggie's sister, who is like the third in the uncorrupted member of the House of Taggie, she's a member of this monastery, but the Baron Taggie, who is the one with the lightsaber, he is so concerned that his sister doesn't turn to be bad. Unbeknownst to him, she does. She worked with Vader to lure Luke Skywalker to this planet in order to trap him and for Vader to kill him. That's the goal. You get this wonderful cover shot in issue number 36. Of course, you gotta love the science fiction-y creation of Carmine Infantino with purple panther with the horn on top of his head because science fiction. Anyway, it's fun to see this because you actually get scenes like this where Vader and Luke talk. You'll notice that Luke is actually in the outfit he wore in the throne room at the end of Star Wars, which why they never made an action figure out of that, I'll never know. But Luke is all ready to fight Vader in a lightsaber battle. They even have the lightsabers drawn and they're ready to fight, but the sister says this is a place of peace and you can't fight in our temple, but we can fight in the crystal field outside. Who knows why, but anyway, that is how it is. In the meantime, Han and Leia and Chewie have come in the Falcon because they kind of don't think that Luke can do this diplomatic mission. They don't trust him. R2's with Luke, and R2 and 3PO are linked, so they actually have it's like a bug. They can hear everything that Luke says and R2 says, and vice versa. But anyway, that leads you to one of the coolest covers in a long time, which is in Mortal Kombat. Now, I have to admit, what's funny here is if you look right here, it almost looks like Vader's helmet is long hair. But this is actually the crystal field in which they fight. And this is a pretty cool cover. This would have been in April of 1980. So this would have been the actual last issue you get to before Empire comes out. And everything's resolved. And of course, at this stage, Archie Goodwin and George Lucas, they have talked. And George has said, don't do this and don't do this and don't do this. Because the movie's coming up. So they don't actually have a lightsaber fight. They have a couple of swings and misses, and you get a couple of moments, and you get this interesting thing. And I have to spoiler warning. Oh, I have my little handmade thing here. Spoilers for reading this, but again, this is a 40-year-old comic. You actually do get battle with Vader and Luke Skywalker, lightsabers. It's not really Vader. He's used some sort of dark force hypnotism thing to make him look like Vader, but it really isn't, because who it actually is Baron Taggy, who is, trying to avenge his humiliation that Luke beat him in the previous issue that you saw. So you actually get a shot like this where it appears that Luke actually kills Vader, and of course before you even turn the page, you're like, that's not going to happen. What's the real story? It's actually Baron Taggy. Baron Taggy, he's got a very interesting look. It's very science fiction-y with a nice high collar like Dracula used to have. But so this would be the final comic that you get before you get Empire, and you actually get Archie Goodwin did a great work when he was writing Star Wars, and I think especially during the time between the films. Between the first two films, he had to been given free rein to just do what he wants to do, and that pays so many dividends. I think these are probably, are these legends now? I can't remember. I know all the EU books became legends after Disney bought Star Wars, and so I can't remember if some of the Marvel stuff is canon or not. I know the new Marvel stuff is. I can't remember if this stuff is not, but what this is pure Star Wars fun. Some of it's goofy. Of course it's goofy because it's the 70s and it's Star Wars. And it's a bunch of, comic book geek guys drawing and writing these stories. And so it is fun. What's interesting about the epilogue of the last issue before Star Wars is it's a callback to episode 15. Now, if you go back to 15, hang on a minute. If you go back to 15, you actually get one of the more interesting covers, which is actually Han Solo in space with a breathing mask against a character whose name was Crimson Jack, and they're fighting outside in space with shooting lasers, and because it's fun. What's fascinating, that's issue 15. In issue number 37, you get a callback to that. You actually get someone locating that Star Destroyer you saw there on the cover of the issue. Who is that person? It is none other than Jabba the Hutt. Now, Jabba here, this is 3 years before Return of the Jedi, of course. This is Jabba as drawn from the original Star Wars adaptation, when they didn't really know what Jabba was supposed to really look like. But of course, in the unused footage, he was a humanoid character, and I found it awesome that this brings Jabba back into the picture. Why, you ask? Well, in Star Wars number 28, which is right here, Han and Chewie paid off Jabba. But by this time, of course, we all know from watching the movie Empire that Han wants to leave because he has a price on his head. Remember, he says, the bounty hunters we found at Ord Mantell made me change my mind. I've got to go back and pay Jabba off. What this epilogue does, it pisses Jabba off again, and now we have the price on Han's head again, which will nicely pave the way for The Empire Strikes Back. In a funny little tag in here, you'll see this right here, which is based on them. The Empire Strikes Back was going to start in May of 1980. It didn't actually happen. You actually had a one-off issue, which is this issue right here, episode number 39, which this is. So the Empire Strikes Back actually begins in June of 1980 and runs for the next 6 issues. So they actually have a nice apology, and they have an explanation as to what happened. And what it was shipping and publishing and new formats back then. And they pretty much had to bring this issue, which was supposed to be in either late 1980 or early 81, they brought it up and put it right smack down in the middle. Of course, what you see right there, I don't know if you can notice, not Carmine Infantino. It is Michael Golden. And I've always loved this issue because how freaking cool is that droid? A droid with a lightsaber. Anyway, that's for later. I'll get to that later. So anyway, comics right before The Empire Strikes Back. The sky was the limit. The galaxy was the limit. And Archie Goodwin and Carmine Infantino, they had a blast. And all of us kids back in 1979, 78, 77, and into 1980, we had a blast right with them. Now, as I said before, today is the day, 40 years ago today, Empire Strikes Back was released. That was a Wednesday back in 1980. I'm going to end up seeing it tomorrow for me. So that would be Friday the 22nd here in 2020. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the Star Wars comic, the original Marvel Comics run of Star Wars. Now, this has whetted my appetite to read more Marvel adaptations, specifically the stuff that's not in the movies. So once I finish through this whole run of Empire, I'll read the comic book adaptation. I will review the novel, which of course is still my original novel, and the next episode will be a review of the album, the soundtrack. But I'm going to keep rereading all of my Star Wars comics because it was really fun. So this is 25 minutes, a little bit longer than I expected, but I just wanted to share my thoughts about these Marvel Star Wars comic books and how much fun they were back then and still are today. So may the Force be with you. Enjoy the 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back, and I'll be back soon with the next episode. Thank you.